To celebrate Film4's 40 years of creating unforgettable cinema, we invited some of our newest talent to talk films and filmmaking.
Oh, this is one of those Film4 things.
Becoming a director.
There you are.
And their experiences working with Film4.
I'm looking at you, aren't I?
Looking at that list, it's the reason why every filmmaker wants to be part of the Film4 family, because so many of my favourite films are in that list, genuinely.
It's an extraordinary list of films and how much a lot of those films have really defined the last 40 years of cinema, but not through being one thing, through being many, many, many things. There's something very cool and entertaining, but at the same time there's a depth of thought behind a lot of these films. There's something deeper going on, and filmmakers who are being allowed to break out of the boundaries of what you might expect cinema to be.
To me, Film4 was always just producing, brilliant films. And even back as a youth in Plymouth, Film4 was kind of important. Channel 4 was incredible. They were both this sort of rather beautiful anarchy. It was different to everything else. My Beautiful Laundrette. It was kind of things that were other, rather than just formally straight. And I loved that, because if you feel a bit other, you just want to go towards it.
I don't like all of the films on that list, and it would be a bad list if I did like all of those films, because quite a lot of them are much more commercial propositions than I think of sometimes when, because the films that I'm into maybe are less commercial.
What is this?
But there's films on there, like Barbarian Sound Studio. How was he allowed to make that film? The film scared me. The film really freaked me out as an audience member, but as a filmmaker, I found it inspiring because I thought, oh, you're allowed to make films like this.
Film4 has always sort of championed filmmakers, it feels like, that might otherwise be sort of so out of the mainstream. It's a very independent-minded company, and it supports independent-minded filmmakers, and it doesn't try to sort of homogenise these filmmakers into a sort of cohesive tone. So when you look at that list, there is a kind of through line, I guess, but equally such a huge variety of different styles and voices.
You see how many iconic films there are, but also then over the years, how many films in there that have kind of inspired me. Not only, I suppose, in my filmmaking, but also inspired me to be a filmmaker. When I watched Local Hero, it's almost like I felt that Bill Forsyth was some kind of creative soulmate.
I wish you could see it. I wish I could describe it to you.
It really spoke to my way of thinking about films and my creative sensibility.
You think of a film like Under the Skin and how different that film is, and how amazing is it that that filmmaker was given the opportunity to make a film like that, when a lot of people would want it to conform a lot more. And there's loads of examples like that in the catalogue that are just really inspiring and kind of push the boundaries of what film can be.
I don't think I'd be who I am now if I hadn't seen films and TV. It's not entertainment, it's formative. It's who you want to be. So when people say this is an influence or that's an influence, we are made of these things. We're not just watching them.
I didn't really see many Black women doing film. And so even though my mom was a filmmaker, she wasn't like me. I'm mixed race, so my mom's a white woman. And so I just kind of never envisioned myself as a filmmaker.
I really didn't think that being a filmmaker was like something that you could do. I don't think it crossed my mind until I was a little older. I kind of started out in comedy, but I was, interested in films, always sort of trying to make short films alongside kind of sketch comedy shows and things.
I started making sketches with friends, straight after university, but that was with no intention of that being anything. They are online somewhere. But then I sort of, at some point, I worked on film sets and things like that. I was a runner. I was a runner on Attack the Block, actually.
When I moved to Scotland to live with my mother, I I started watching the Film4 channel a lot, and I sort of had this education of film kind of night after night, and it's where I sort of started paying attention to the filmmaking itself rather than just sort of consuming these stories.
For most of my life, up until maybe I was 20, 21, I thought of myself as like, I could probably do music or like be an athlete. And so I did sports, and I then kind of went really hard down that route, and that kind of enabled me to go to college. It enabled me to travel the world, make money. But I didn't have like a creative outlet, and I was really good at art and really good at music and all this other stuff, but I didn't have the confidence nor the like knowledge that that was something I could really seek out.
I still look back on that. I did my first short in 2014, and I don't think even then I knew I wanted to be a director until after it. Like, I'd finished it and realised I enjoyed that process. Like, I've never been that person who was like, oh, I want to be a director since I was 10.
I decided I wanted to go to university and try and train in something. And I did an online multiple choice quiz, and it was going to tell me what course I should do. And it suggested film production or to become a librarian. But I'm very dyslexic, so I can't be a librarian. So I only left filmmaking.
I was a theatre director for a really long time, and I think because of a lack of confidence in myself, of being able to move across multiple art forms and that nobody would take me seriously. And I love making theatre, and I love watching audiences watch the work and watch it differently every night. But I began to crave, I guess, the permanence of story.
I realised that working in theatre was very different in terms of how you see things. So you're always really thinking about the wide shot, if you like, the proscenium. And then I had to, work with some cinematographers who were saying, oh, you need to think about where you need to put the camera. And I said, well, don't you just put it here? And then the actors, and then you start to realise, no, you choose where the audience looks. That was a big leap for me.
When I started looking into film, I felt like the thing I was most excited about was music videos. And so I started kind of exploring film through sound in a way. And then, it actually wasn't until the pandemic happened that this like love for music kind of resurfaced, and I started making music and like diving deeper into sound just by way of being locked away from the world. And that kind of enabled another side of, I think, my love for film in a different way.
From the age of like 14, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I had no access to filmmaking. I had no access to cameras. And actually all of my friends at high school, for my 18th birthday, like clubbed money together to buy me a Handycam. And I started making films on that. And so I became very much about trying to just experience the making side of things. I was very sort of hyper-stressed about not knowing how to do it. And there are no film schools in South Africa, really. So it was this real kind of panic about, I know so deeply that I want to do this thing, but I don't see the road ahead very clearly.
I knew from a very young age that I had to find my way to film. I didn't know how, and it took a while.
I think if I've got one thing going for me, it's my work ethic and my determination to get something done. So my previous film, Bait, the first draft was 1999, and the film came out in 2019. So it took 20 years to get that film onto the screen, and I never sort of gave up on it. I always thought it's going to happen at some point.
There's so many different stages that I love and also hate about filmmaking. But, I mean, there's always this moment on set where you're like, this is just great. Like, everyone has this completely different discipline, a lot of them from totally different backgrounds, all combining to make one thing that you all want to make together, from like lighting to costume to makeup to art. And like, we're all just focusing on this one image to make that right, and then we're going to move on to the next image and try and make that right.
How do you know all this stuff?
You were snoozing, and I was reading.
Filmmaking is like such an extraordinarily collaborative process. It's the sum of so many people, and I feel like this applies to when you're on set, the harmony of the cast and the crew, and the producers and the director, it all has to, I really sort of believe that the energy of that influence is what ends up on the screen.
You really do need a team to make a film, and you need everybody from the PAs to the crafty to the financiers to the development team, producers. And so everybody needs to be full into this project, otherwise it's not going to get done.
But I think that's crucial, you know, and I guess like every question that is asked of you is an opportunity to improve the film, or whatever the project may be. So yeah, I don't think anyone can make a film in a vacuum, and it's one of the sort of most beautiful things about filmmaking, I think, is that it is so collaborative.
What do you want now?
Don't talk to me like that.
I think the edit was where I'd learned most about filmmaking in this process, was how much you can restructure things and how much you can, especially with our film, because the structure is quite loose.
Hello.
Please don't tell anyone.
Film4 said, what if you just try and move that scene with Hazel earlier? And we're like, oh, we can do that? So we can just move out of script order, which we've done a tiny bit by 5 minutes. But when we're talking about moving something 60 minutes early, and we're like, okay. And then suddenly that opened up the whole thing, and then we realised, right, now we can just do it. We're writing again.
If I was interested in purely telling stories, then I'd be sat around a fire telling stories. But I want to use cameras. I want to manipulate time. The old phrase that I use all the time, geographical and temporal dislocation, which sounds really highfalutin, but it's just jumping around in time and space like our minds do, you know. That's why we had to invent cinema, so that we could express how our conscious and subconscious works. We had to invent it.
Take one. At the beginning, when you start out, you're really interested in film, you want to make films, you want to be a filmmaker. But then I think gradually over the course of time you realise that it's just something that's in you, and that you have to do it.
Okay, stand by for rehearsal.
It's an obsession. Making films is an obsession. It's a compulsion in some way. It's, you know, people always talk about, you know, your job and having a job, but I don't have a job. I get to do the thing that I love, and every aspect of it is what I want, and every aspect of it is fulfilling in some way. The start of my story as a film director is somebody who thought that it was impossible and intangible and far, far away. So every step of this has been a deepening of my love for what I do and what I get to do. The pressure is, I suppose, this pressure to always be worth it, always make sure that I have something to offer the audience. Somebody once said to me, you can't be a great filmmaker if you have nothing to say. And it's like, oh, what do I have to say? What do I want to say? And then so it's a life, you know. It's your life making films.
You can watch like great works of cinema, but really it's the connection between director and actor and script. That's all it is.
Making a film, there's so much planning, there's so much pre-production, the design, the cinematography, the schedule, the weather, the budget. But when you're shooting an emotional scene and all of that stuff falls away and it's just you and these amazing actors that you have the privilege of working with.
He just left, Jack. What did you do to him?
And you get to see their performance.
You have to go.
They're all of the memories that I cherish the most.
I wouldn't have been able to make Limbo if it wasn't for Film4.
Action!
You know, when I was promoting Limbo, it was something that often came up. It's like, how did you get this film made? You know, it's like, and not that people were saying because it's terrible, but because, you know, it's a film that's made in a slightly different way. It's not kind of cookie cutter material.
I think Film4 operate with the confidence and conviction of you know, a large film company, but with the kind of like punkiness and quickness and weirdness that makes, certainly for first-time filmmakers, feel like they can bring them their kind of weirdest, tiniest, you know, most personal ideas.
And do something a bit different as well, because if you're always making the traditional choice, then you're never really pushing the boundaries of what that story could be or what that film could be. And so being able to have that freedom, I think, is important if you want to make work that's unique and personal, but also that is going to speak to an audience.
it kind of makes important films. I think that that's part of the identity of Film4. But I think that it also is about making films that are challenging the cinematic form, that are progressing the cinematic form, and willing to take risks on filmmakers that are disruptors and that want to do something different.
When I look at Film4, to me it represents bold storytelling, and it represents risk-taking, I think. You know, they encourage filmmakers to push the boundaries and to, you know, maybe tell stories that may not have the most commercial aspect to them, but artistically they have a lot of merit. And I think that's why they've stood the test of time, is because they put the art ahead of everything else.
They're just incredibly supportive to what can be quite a wild anarchy, you know, and that is not like business sense, but it's art sense and movie sense, because you need to make new things.
Film4 aren't just there to give you the money to make the film and then they disappear. They support the film for the whole life, so it's got to be a collaboration.
As you go through the process and you're bombarded by so many problems and compromises and difficulties, the people who help you develop the idea can just keep reminding you, do you remember when? You said you wanted to do this, so keep going, and it's great.
It's nice to have people specifically that I feel like I can just phone up and say, I have an idea, or phone up and say, I'm really struggling with this thing.
You want people who are going to push you to go further. Like, you know, be more inventive, be more creative. I think they're the people I want to work with, the people who are going to push me to go further.
When I was looking at the list of films, I really thought there was something amazing about, you know, obviously I know the work of Steve McQueen, but I was like, when I really thought about my own difficulty as a filmmaker, or not even particularly my difficulties, but the difficulties of filmmakers from underrepresented groups the pressure to tell your own story, the pressure to excavate your own pain. And then, obviously, Stephen King was always a Turner Prize-winning artist, but he's still a first-time filmmaker. And the real courage to go, I will tell the story of an Irish hero, and that is still my story. I just was like, wow, this is such like a radical statement to be like, yeah, we will back you.
A defining moment is when you're watching a film and you see, you know, the beginning credits. And whenever you watch the same films that you love and they have the same kind of credits at the beginning, you're like, oh, what's that company? Because, like, I want to work with that company. They obviously have aligned tastes. And so that was definitely one of the things that struck me about Film4, is like I was noticing Film4 on a lot of films I loved.
I felt really honoured to be part of a company that had made those films and thinks that, you know, my films are worth kind of adding to that list. And that I think also there's something about looking through the Film4 back catalogue and realising how many filmmakers recur.
You know, that's one of the many reasons as well why, you know, it's like you kind of want to be a Film4 filmmaker. You want to be part of that.
It's the reason why going to Film4 for my first development meeting, it was, you know, there's an element of it that's intimidating and you have to fight your imposter syndrome quite a lot. Because when I look at that list, I look at my heroes and, you know, it's just, yeah, it's very humbling and it's a huge honour to be part of that list.
More and more it feels like there is a need to protect a certain kind of film, a certain kind of cinema that exists and still exists and hopefully will continue to exist, where, you know, people who have something to say can find the means and the way to say it.